this section, we'll be covering how to identify the steps to set up and maintain a user, as well as, if given a scenario, being able to troubleshoot common user access and visibility issues. These are the two primary things you need to know according to the exam outline in the study guide. So without further ado, the way to get into the user setup is by way of this setup menu. To the right of your name in your developer account, you should see a setup link. Click on it, and that brings you back to the setup view, which you are hopefully familiar with by this time. And once again, in order to quickly find what you're looking for, you can search for a keyword, but if you'll notice, the first link under the administer section here at the top of the setup menu is manage users. I'm going to click this arrow here to expand the manage users section, and you'll see the different functionality you can do under the manage users section is you can manage users, you can look at adoption management, that has to do with user adoption of Salesforce. You can mass email users, and this is also where you set up roles, permission sets, and profiles, all of which we'll be covering later on in this course, as well as public groups, queues, and login history. To manage existing users or to add new users or to deactivate existing users in your Salesforce instance, you click on the users link under Manage Users, and that brings you to a list of the users that are currently in your Salesforce instance. And so I previously created a user account called John Doe for an example here, just so that I would have an additional user other than my own, which is down here at the bottom. And so you notice as well, there's a few other user records that are active on the platform right now, and these go beyond the scope of this course, and they're there by default. And if you're following along in your own Salesforce account, you'll see similar users, and you'll notice as well, this active column shows which users in your Salesforce instance are active. So my example here of John Doe is no longer active in my Salesforce instance. And then as well, you'll see my own user account and that I am active. So if I wanted to go in and view a user record and just go in view only mode, I would click on this link here, and this would take me to the user detail page. And then very common thing across Salesforce are these edit links that appear to the left. And if you wanted to go in and edit a user record, you'd click on edit. So let's view the user detail for my own user account. And something that I want to highlight here has to do with the login history for a user. And you notice here we've got these hover over links available on the user details screen, and you can hover over these and it brings up the various related lists for these various links, and then a number as well to show you quickly if there's any records related to that related list. So most of these have a 0 here, but I do have a couple of instances where I've logged in to Salesforce, and so this takes me to my login history, and you can also download 6 months of login history here for your entire org, and that exports to a CSV file. Now, I want to highlight login history because you'll often have users reporting to you as an administrator that they cannot log into Salesforce. And so one of the first things you'll want to do is to check the login history on their user record. And if it shows that they've been successful in logging into Salesforce and you don't see that their account has been locked out or they've had unsuccessful attempts, then that means one of two things. It means that they're either using the incorrect username and they're not logging in under the correct username that they've been assigned, or they're logging into the wrong location. An example would be that they're trying to log in to a production instance of Salesforce, but instead of typing in login.salesforce.com in their browser URL section address, they've typed in something like test.salesforce.com, which would be the login that you would use, the login address you would use for a sandbox instance. And so just keep in mind and bear in mind that the login history that's tied to a user account has to do with their username and is tied to the username they've been assigned to. And so if they're saying they're not able to log in, or saying that they're locked out and you don't see anything in the login history, you need to verify where they're trying to log into and what username they're using. And so that's important because if you bear in mind on the study guide, one of the criteria under the exam outline in Section 5 says that given a scenario, troubleshoot common user access and visibility issues. And so as it relates to user access, this login history is very important. The other item under user setup relates to identifying the steps to set up and maintain a user. And so I mentioned previously that you can edit a user record. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to add additional feature licenses to my user account. And so now that I'm in edit mode, I can select additional feature licenses. I'm going to say that I'm a site.com contributor user and a site.com publisher user. Site.com is an external website solution that Salesforce provides to where you can expose your Salesforce data to outside users. You'll want to set security around what you want to expose and that sort of thing. And site.com is not on the admin certification exam as far as I'm aware, but I just wanted to show how you can assign different feature licenses or take away different feature licenses from a user. And so this is how you can edit a user account. And then when you're done, you can click Save. So I'm going to go back to the users section to see what users I have in my instance. And so I've got these various user accounts. And so let's say we need to create a new user account. You click on New User and you enter in the name information for the new user. Their alias defaults to first initial and then the last name with so many character limit. You enter in their email address. And I'm just using a fake email address right now for demo purposes. It defaults their username as their email address that you entered. You can change that username to anything you would like. It just needs to be in the form of an email address. You can enter in title and company, department, and division. And then here's where you assign the role of the new user. I'm going to put Jim Doe on the marketing team with a user license of Salesforce. We're going to keep that the default. And for profile, we're going to assign them a custom profile called marketing profile. And this list of profiles are the default list of profiles that come standard in a free Salesforce developer account. And so you can create additional custom profiles. And I want to assign this user the marketing user feature license, and you can also assign them other feature licenses as well. Scrolling down, you can enter their mailing address and other information such as the time zone that they're in, their locale and their language if they wanted a different language for their Salesforce instance to be localized to. For when they're logged in, they could see other languages here. I'm going to keep this as English for now. There's also approver settings that have to do with approval processes. We'll go into that later. And then you can also specify if you want them to receive the Salesforce newsletter, and if you want them to receive the administrator newsletter. And these are things that Salesforce sends out sporadically. If they're not an administrator, don't check for them to receive the administrator newsletter because that won't be relevant. And then with this checked, generate new password and notify user immediately. Once you click Save, they'll receive an email that shows that they now have a Salesforce user account, and a link in that email, if they click it, will take them into Salesforce to where they can set their password. So you'll notice here now that Jim is an active user and he has his feature license of a marketing user. So I want to show a few of these buttons here that are important and that will come into play as you're administering on the platform. We showed previously how to edit a user record by clicking Edit. There's also a sharing button, and that has to do with sharing settings, and that's not used so much necessarily with user records, but you'll get involved with sharing as it relates to other types of records, usually such as accounts or contacts or opportunities. We'll go into more related to sharing settings in a later lecture. The things that will really come into play for you as an administrator are these two buttons here, the Reset Password and the Freeze button. Now the Reset Password button is pretty straightforward in that, we mentioned previously if a user is reporting that they're unable to log in to Salesforce and they've locked themselves out of their account, and if you look at their login history and you see that they indeed do have failed attempts, you can reset their password by clicking Reset Password. You get prompted, are you sure you want to reset the password for this user? You click OK, and then a new password for the following user has been sent via email. And so the user will be required to enter a new password upon initial login to Salesforce. You can, in addition to clicking the Reset Password button, what I prefer personally is clicking Edit. And this is just a helpful tip. And at the very bottom, there's this checkbox to generate new password and notify user immediately. And so this is helpful, especially if you're resetting a password for a user in a sandbox. And why that is because users in a sandbox environment, a lot of times when you first set up a sandbox, they won't have a valid email address in their user record for their user login in a sandbox environment. And so if you just click to reset password, Salesforce attempts to send the email to an invalid email address and they never get the notification. So what I like to do is go in and edit the user record and make sure that we have their valid email address here and not like a .dev or a .prod or something for a sandbox name under their email address, so that you know that if you check this box at the bottom here to generate new password and notify user immediately, once you click save, it'll send them the email regarding their password being reset, and they can click through the link in the email to then log in to whatever Salesforce instance you've reset their password on, and they can set a new password. I know that's kind of confusing, but I wanted to show you that there's more than one way to reset the user password. So in addition to the reset password button, another button that you'll use on user records has to do with freezing a user account. And what that means is you will occasionally need to freeze a user. And that is usually someone that's an administrator or someone whose user account is an integral part of the operation of your Salesforce instance. And the scenario would be if you have an administrator or someone that's set up a lot of scheduled reports or dashboard refreshes or scheduled jobs that are set to happen in a scheduled job queue. Those things will error out if you were to just deactivate this user. And so why you would need to deactivate a user is if they were to leave the company. And it's a common practice in just the IT world in general that when someone leaves a company, one of the first things you do is you lock out their access to the network so they can't do anything ill-advised. And so in Salesforce, you can edit the user record, and you can just simply select to uncheck the active checkbox, and you'll receive a prompt here saying deactivating users removes them from all delegated groups and sharing privileges. And so it also talks about removing the user from any teams and that sort of thing before they can be deactivated, and you can click save. I'm going to cancel out of that though and not deactivate this user quite yet because I want to show you what it's like to freeze a user account. So for example, let's say Jim Doe has been with the company for a long time, and instead of him, being a marketing user or something like that, let's say he's a system administrator, and it's his user account that set up the scheduled data exports for a weekly data export, and all the dashboards are set to run as his user record, and so those are scheduled to refresh at certain times, and that there's emails that are scheduled to be sent at certain times of reports. And those sorts of things will break if a user is deactivated. And so what you want to do in those scenarios, you can freeze the user account and then go in and reassign any of those scheduled jobs to an active admin type user so that those jobs will then go out like normal. And then once you have all of those scheduled jobs reassigned to an active admin user, you can then deactivate this user. And so what buys you time in order to do that is clicking the freeze button. If you freeze a user, then they can no longer log in to Salesforce, but their user account still remains active. So that way, once they're frozen, that you know that they can't log in, and you can then go in as an administrator and remove them from any sort of scheduled jobs. And so we will see more examples of that when we get into scheduling reports, and when we get into the dashboard piece, you'll see more information on running users, and that'll begin to gel and make sense as to why certain user accounts are harder to simply deactivate than others. And so that's why Salesforce is now giving us the ability to freeze a user. And then as well, you can even, as you see here, unfreeze a user if you needed to freeze someone out for a time. And so that might be a situation where you have a consultant that's helping on your Salesforce instance, and rather than deactivating their user account, you just want to lock them out until you've got more work for them to do, and you want to make sure that they're not working at times that you don't want them to. You can freeze their account and then unfreeze it.